Well, I am now forecasting blackouts. I can't see any way out of them for the UK. And this is because NESO, which is the National Energy Systems Operator, it's an organisation that runs our energy systems and operates the overall control, if you like. And that system is basically run on ideology now. It's not run on physics or engineering principles. I'll now explain this, and very simple. Anyone can understand what I'm going to explain, but they're incompetent. I understand, just as I'm making this video, there may be a review into what they've been claiming. They need to, but they're re-examining themselves. I don't see any hope for them. I think they are totally bonkers. So I'm going to explain this, why we're heading into blackouts, and I'm going to explain it very, very simply. It doesn't require anything else but common sense. A little bit of knowledge at some points, but I'll put that in. Okay, here we go. So the first thing we're dealing with is, and this is from the NESO report, what power can we rely on when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining? What is the minimum we can rely on to meet demand? And then we'll look at demand. So the first part is what we can rely on. Let me first of all dispense with solar. NESO and I both agree that solar plays no part in meeting our security of supply, because our security of supply, that's the avoidance of blackouts, the ability to meet demand, occurs at peak times in the evening in a cold winter's day, and that's when it's dark, and solar plays no part. So solar is out. This is how NESO manage the contingency to ensure we do not have blackouts. Now, first of all, what we have up the side here is the amount of gigawatts being produced at any one time. And this first bar here, and I'm going to zoom in just on this, has all the different sources of the maximum theoretical amount of energy. Now, this is purely theoretical. We will never have this much because it's almost like a perfect world that doesn't exist. But it's a good start because we have to actually look at this and say, how much can we rely on? So let's quickly go through this. At the bottom here, we have how much nuclear power provides. And that's a very reliable, steady state power. In fact, it can't be varied very fast. That's a bedrock of the power grid, if you like. And the next block here, this purple block, is thermal. That's what they call it, but in actual fact it's gas. And that again, you know what you're going to get. That can be called upon if it's there. I say if it's there, as you'll see later, that can be a problem in the future. And now we have the wind. Now this is assuming, this amount of wind is assuming that every single wind turbine in every single place in the country, everywhere, is at the right angle, blowing perfectly at the optimum speed. Of course, that's impossible, and we're going to have to allow for that, but that is the amount that's shown here. It's a theoretical limit. And this next one, the other one, is storage, and I'm baffled. I understand De Norwich pump storage can give 9.1 gigawatt hours, so it can run at about maximum of 1.7 gigawatts or so for 6 hours. It can do things like that. NESO refers to electricity storage as that has booked transmission entry capacity, i.e. pumped and battery. So it's pumped and battery, but it doesn't allow for us how many minutes or seconds that it can supply it for. But never mind, we'll have to pass on. This small amount here they call other. I guess it's things like hydroelectric, which is nice, but it's very tiny, and odds and sods, as it were. So I'll just have to accept it. They apparently have other, and I'm sure they do. So let's go to the last contribution, and it's an important one. And this one is imports. That's sucking on the interconnectors in from France, Holland, Norway, and so on to balance our electricity grid. Now, the rules here are the exporter controls it, not the importer. So if, for example, we don't want to supply any energy to Ireland on the interconnector, we control that. That's our decision. If we need it, the priority is going to come to us. And that's the same for every single one. So exports are controlled by the exporter, imports are not. So there we have a totally theoretical amount of energy available there. And, if the wind is blowing all the time, everything's perfect and everything's at full capacity in a dream world, that is the theoretical limit. But NESO can't use that. They can't plan on that. What they've got to do is plan on what is safe enough and leaving a contingency to meet demand. Because the moment it's out of balance, there are going to be serious blackouts around the country and serious consequences. So let's move over now to see what they actually take as firm out of that lot of energy production. Now, if you compare the bottom one, the nuclear, they've allowed for a little bit of reduction for maintenance, various things like that. I would agree with that, looks reasonable to me. And let's take the thermal, which is the gas and so on, gas and biomass. Well, again, they've allowed for a tiny bit of being out, and that's perfectly reasonable because plants have to be maintained and various things have to happen. That's reasonable. But the big one we come to, the big reduction, is in the wind. So you can see how that green amount there, the wind has reduced, that we can rely on, they say, to this amount. 4.416 gigawatts. Well, it's clearly wrong, because October the 28th, 24 to January the 15th, 25, 832 times, and this is taking 30-minute periods throughout the day, so you get 48 slots. 832 times it was below that figure. January the 8th, 25, in half-hour periods, it was below this 23 times. So the minimum so far is the 15th to the 15th of January is 1.91 gigawatts, not 4.41. So it's less than half of what's happened recently. But in more extreme weather, it can go down to a practical zero. And you also have to allow for the fact that the wind can be in the wrong place, and you don't have the distribution system to get the power there to where you need it. What the problem is here is this. You really can't rely on having any wind at all when the wind stops. It can stop over the whole of the UK. And when the wind's below a certain speed, you get nothing at all. Actually, when the wind's above a certain high speed, you get nothing at all as well. But you can have this high over the whole of the UK or the whole of Europe, so it affects everybody. So the true figure there should be zero. You only have to look at just those dates I've quoted when hundreds of times it was below that figure they've assumed is always going to be there, because that is the figure they've assumed is always going to be there. It should be zero. But the story doesn't stop there. So what we're going to do now is carry on to the next one. And the next one is storage. Well, storage doesn't really belong here, because storage is an amount of electricity. It's the megawatt hours rather than the megawatts. How much instantly is flowing is megawatts, and how long the flowing is, the amount is megawatt hours. Now, I know, for example, Norway has 9.1 or so gigawatt hours stored, and it can output it at about 1.7. So I can't think of much else, because there's a few batteries around. They don't do very much, but it's tiny. But you can have 9 days or more without wind at all. So any storage runs out very quickly. So to mix up storage, which is a totally different unit in this column of amounts, of rates, is wrong. And I think the storage is just an absolute fiddle. I really, really do. I mean, basically, the only thing you can use is gas, but we've already used that up. And so I think that is just ridiculous. I can't make any sense of that at all. How can I maybe explain it easier? If I told you that you have a battery, a car battery, and you can light up a light, oh yeah, I can draw a light there, for so long, I can draw this power for so long. It's for so long. It's not continuous, so it might not be there when you need it. I really don't think they should be putting storage as such in there at all, unless they can define a length of time they can hold it for, which is quite long, like 10 days or more. So that is incredible that they put that in. And then the one above this, is the odds and sods, as it were. Oh, well, I don't know. It's probably hydroelectric or something. And then we come to the big one, imports. Now, imports are under the control of the exporter. So we connect to countries from Norway, friendly Denmark, and so on. We connect to these countries and France, and we can import, export. And what they did here, I can prove wrong straight away. Because on January the 8th, when we had the very, very close shave recently to a blackout situation, there was less imports by 300 megawatt less than what they've assumed is the minimum there. So in actual fact, even that is wrong. So what is clear is that it's way under our planning capacity to meet crisis is way under what they estimate there in total, way under. So what's below here now is rubbish. So I'm now going to move along to the amount of demand they estimate to see what they've estimated as the contingency, the spare. Well, they've underestimated the demand. If you take some examples I've listed here, which are November the 21st, they underestimated it by 4.6 gigawatts, January the 8th by 2.5 gigawatts, January the 11th by 5 gigawatts. So the demand estimating is frequently wrong. And this is just taken some recent dates. So what does all this come to? Well, think about the storage they talked about. I mean, even if they used all the battery storage we got at the end of 23, we know it was around about 1.9 gigawatts. It only lasts for 1 or 2 hours, if that. So you really can't allow that storage thing in there. We know the wind is completely overestimated by about 4, and so on. So these figures are not true engineering figures. This is not an organization that's planning based on reality. It's an ideology. So the whole country with its energy now is being run by an ideology. I'll call it the Miliband ideology for the moment, because that's what it is. It's the Miliband ideology. And for that reason, I'm sticking my head out and doing a forecast here. We're going to have blackouts. All we need is, we haven't had it yet, but all we need is a prolonged cold spell. A prolonged cold spell. Apparently, we've got hardly any gas storage as well because we did away with all that. I think that was Theresa May did away with that. And instead of mothballing it, it was an under the North Sea facility. Instead of mothballing it, no, we let it go. So it's things like this that are just madness personified from all the governments we've had. I mean, from the Conservatives and Labour governments. So, we've had 14 years of this green madness. And now the chickens are truly coming home to roost. So I'm forecasting blackouts. So during the making of this video, in fact, as I finished this section editing, I just looked up the energy dashboard, and lo and behold, on the 21st of January at about 7 o'clock in the morning, look at the amount of wind energy we were getting in the UK. You could call it zero. And it was pretty low, next to nothing, from 2300 until about 5 o'clock the next day. But at times, just about zero. Now, no matter how much wind we have, no matter whether we treble it or not, 3 times 0 is still 0. And at this point, the part I'm in now is gas, the blue part, and the part below here, that's the imports. And we relied on imports and gas. That's it. So the idea that you're suddenly going to get 4-point-something gigawatts out of this, of wind reliably always, is for the birds. It's not true. I will finish this video off now by taking a look at our totally bonkers, and I mean bonkers, Energy Minister. Probably the most dangerous man in Britain, vying with our Prime Minister.
We are at the moment at the mercy of the roller coaster of fossil fuel markets.
This scare story by Miliband is simply untrue. We had a big spike in gas prices when the Ukraine war hit, but since then it's settled down. And had we run without the wind power for the last 5 years, we'd have been £18 billion better off just using gas. We also have enormous amounts of our own gas reserves in terms of fracking and in other places.
Gas prices, wherever we get the gas from, subject to the decisions of petrostates and dictators.
He is the energy of state for energy in our country, and he can look up the figures immediately, but he prefers to lie to you. And that's all I can say, because look at the sources of our gas. The top supplier that supplies 41.1% is Norway, an extremely friendly country that's very close to us. The next one is the North Sea, still supplying just on 30%, to be precise, 29.5%. So between those two, you've got 70% is supplied there. Now, the next country that makes up the other 18.3%, taking us to over 88% of our supplies, is the USA. And then you've got Qatar, and then you've got Peru. All these are tiny. This is not the true image he's painting, is it? He's just deceiving you, the public, because he's an ideologue that wants to propagate this world order and do all this damage to us to achieve absolutely nothing, even on his own terms, because we have no effect on the CO2. And by the way, you're now going to see energy prices drop. Even though they're only a third of ours today, they're going to drop much further in the USA, and they'll be exporting LNG, etc., at much lower prices.
And your viewers are seeing it in their energy bills, have been seeing it for years, particularly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's time to actually have homegrown, clean energy that we can control. That is what our plan is all about.
Not at all. Your plan is to hugely increase prices with wind and solar and be at the mercy of the weather, as has been demonstrated in your NESO plans. Totally at the mercy of the weather. The exact opposite of reliable energy. And you only have to look at the way prices are rising as renewables come in. In addition, all the most expensive countries in the world for electricity are all the ones with the highest per capita wind power. Your NESO report makes it totally clear that we need to keep all the existing gas stations in place for when the wind's not blowing. So in effect, you are building another power system, another energy system alongside the existing system. And that, Mr. Miliband, is very expensive.
It's the right thing for the country, for bills, for security. Now have the National Energy System Operator, the independent body that has looked at these plans and says it's achievable, which is really important. It gives us energy security. It will lower the cost of electricity and it can lead to lower bills.
Again, totally untrue. The NESO report does not say it will lead to lower costs. It does not say that. It makes some incredibly bad assumptions and uses words like may do if this is right. But when you look at what they're assuming, it's absurd. The facts are electricity prices are rising. They've risen every few months recently because of your madness, because of your bunker plans, Mr. Miliband.
It will lower the cost of electricity and it can lead to lower bills. And the reason for this is actually intuitive, which is if you build this clean energy infrastructure, the costs of running renewable energy, like offshore wind, are significantly lower than the costs of running fossil fuels, and you're not subject to the price spikes.
I was recently sent a clip from a government website, a UK government, and it said gas was £114 a megawatt hour and wind was just £44 a megawatt hour. What they failed to point out in that, of course, was one, the wind price was the 2012 price, and it was actually nearer to £80 an hour with the inflation index they have to allow for, because they quote the prices in 2012. So whoever wrote that forgot that, and they didn't allow for the fact they just added £60 a megawatt hour carbon tax to the gas. So they took it from £54 to £114. So it's this sort of madness and this sort of misrepresentation that can only be either they're stupid, which I don't think they are that stupid, or they're intentionally misleading you for some sort of ideological world. Now, we probably have, I'm 80 now, and I think this is the worst government I've ever seen. And my interest in politics started when I was 11 in 1956. So that's when my interest started, when I was buying newspapers and so on and started looking at politics. And so I've been doing politics now for 69 years. Never has anything come near to the incompetence of the government we have in the UK now. It's impossible. He is just deceiving you time after time after time. It's got to be stopped. Now that we've got the USA out of it, of course, so we've got Russia out of it, we've got China out of it, we've got the Far East all out of it, India out of it, we've got America out of it now. What are we doing this for? I mean, no, but he's doubled down. Since Trump has made his statements, he's doubled down on all this, Miliband, and said, it's not going fast enough. We need to push ahead, So, I mean, we're being exposed to utter madness. And either he brings the government down or he goes. It's as simple as that. Well, I'm going to let him ramble on now with deception after deception. But what he comes to at the end of this little ramble is the fact that you can't be trusted with this, you people, and locally. No, no, no. This is going to be imposed directly over you because it's strategically important. So we're going to impose this on your communities, regardless of what your communities say. This is coming from the centre. As all socialism must end up, it must end up with restriction of choice, restriction of freedom, and imposition from the centre. And that's what you're going to get. And this is how he explains it.
So it's an achievable plan and it'll lower bills. Every solar panel we put up, every wind turbine we build, every piece of infrastructure we build gives us more security and gets us on that path to lower bills. And some people aren't going to like it, Naga. Some people aren't going to like, more wind turbines, for example, more solar panels. In a way, that's a choice we've got to make as a country. Do we stick to the old insecure path with all of the dangers that I've outlined? Or do we do something different? I say we do something different. We are saying that for onshore wind above 100 megawatts, as with other nationally significant infrastructure, that will be a decision made by the Secretary of State. And local people will have a say, but these are nationally significant decisions, and we think it's right that central government makes these decisions.
Well, I've come to the end of this video, but there is a follow-up video on this coming soon, and it's to do with how they've modelled the demand in the future, because a child could do better, and I'm going to completely take it apart, how they've modelled it, because it's absurd, truly, truly absurd, on a scale which takes your breath away, because the idiots in NESO doing this don't have a clue what they're doing. And so I will explain that in the next video. It really is. I can't believe how bad it is, because their future planning is based on absolute nonsense. I don't think they've got the skills there to do what they're supposed to do. They're led by Miliband, who has the power to sack their boss. So when he says it's independent, as a Secretary of State, not individually, as a Secretary of State, he owns 75% of NESO and has the power to control the whole thing. It's anything but independent. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, and please look out for the next one. It's on the future plans of NESO. Thank you for watching.